Please welcome moderator Scott Siu and the panelists of Convergence, How It All Comes Together.
Welcome to this afternoon's panel discussion, and we're going to be talking about convergence. And let me introduce our panelists, and then I will actually try and attempt to give you folks a working definition of convergence, or at least what's going through our minds. So joining me on stage, we have Stacey Crowley. Stacey, oh, excuse me, sorry. They load me up with all sorts of things, including an iPad, Post-it note in here, and so on. So let me introduce Stacey. Stacey Crowley is with the California ISO. She is Vice President of Regional and Federal Affairs. So in this role, what Stacey is basically doing is she is at the front end of trying to fly from city to city, state to state, making sure that people understand what the Cal ISO is about, how they may participate, as different states consider joining markets or creating markets. That is what Stacey is helping them understand. How does that happen? How does it work? And especially how might they engage with the Cal ISO? Welcome, Stacey. On her right is Martha Symko-Davies. Martha is Laboratory Program Manager, Energy Systems Integration at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado. Martha has been Laboratory Program Manager there for how long, Martha? Maybe the last couple of years, okay. But actually she's been at NREL for 20 years, doing a variety of different research, business development, and in her current capacity, this is I would call it a seminal lab, which is going to be helping people understand actually convergence, how different technologies can actually be brought together and how they might operate and function in a real world environment. Welcome, Martha. And then finally, we have Mr. Michael Yamane on the far end. Mike is Chief of Operations at Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, KIUC. Mike has been at KIUC since 1989. Started as an engineer there and has worked for all these decades in various areas of responsibility. He has a lot of experience, including on the policy side, working with our state legislature, and has been one of the leaders here in the state in terms of charting the course forward towards renewables. So welcome to Mike. So with that, let me give you folks a sense of what we're talking about when we refer to convergence. Honestly, when I was first asked to moderate this panel, I actually had to think of convergence. Back in engineering school, we were taught that as you design a rocket nozzle, in order to have that nozzle do anything useful, you had to have convergence, right? So essentially, you're making things all come together, building that nice pressure, and then actually letting it go through the nozzle, letting it diverge. And if you don't do that, that rocket's not going to go anywhere. So I want you folks to think about that in your mind, okay? You need to have things come together in order to have something useful happen. But then very importantly, you have to let things diverge a little bit after you converge. So again, sorry, that's the engineer in me. Convergence, more loosely put, is when you are able to bring different parties, different folks together and unite in a common purpose and achieve a common goal. So that's really, really the simplest definition I could think of in terms of what it means to converge. So the general questions that we have for our panelists is to think back on their various experiences, think ahead too as we are charting the course forward towards 100% renewable energy here in Hawaii, also moving the ball on the mainland in other jurisdictions, and to think through this topic of convergence. Share any experiences that you've had. An example would be, for example, here in Hawaii, as we ourselves have worked on solving the renewable energy puzzle, we quickly found that transportation sector energy is a critical area that we can converge with, right? As we are able to electrify transportation, If we can build good load during the middle of the daytime, we can make more use of available solar energy, being the example. So I'm going to start with you, Stacey, and give you the floor for the next several minutes.
Thank you, Scott. We decided we were all going to present from our chairs, a little bit more informal, and so thank you so much for welcoming me and inviting me to speak here today. As Scott said, I'm with the California Independent System Operator, and for those who don't know, I'll just show you one slide here about what we do. An independent system operator is really a way for multiple utilities to collect their high distribution or their high voltage transmission system under an operator that is non-discriminatory, one that does not pick winners and losers, but it dispatches energy across a larger footprint and does so based on a least cost dispatch system. And as an independent system operator, we are a public benefit corporation, so we're a 501c3, and we work with 80% of the utilities in California and a small portion of a utility in Nevada. And the 80% of California includes Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and several smaller either municipal or co-op utilities in California. And what we do is essentially, like I said, aggregate all the resources that those utilities have, and then dispatch them across that larger footprint and do so in what we call an optimized way, the most efficient way possible. We are one of 38 balancing authorities in the West, and so the Western interconnection includes about 12 portions of, I think, 14 states in the West, plus Alberta and British Columbia in Canada, and then Baja, Mexico, so a small portion of Mexico. And that Western interconnection is integrated. We all run at 60 hertz, and we all sort of deal and manage the flows across our system as one. And with 38 balancing authorities come some challenges, and I'll talk about that when we get further down the road here today. We pride ourselves in having a fairly sophisticated technology system that allows us to do all that. So we dispatch that electricity every 4 seconds, and we test and make sure that all those resources are there, that the bids are in so that we get the economic benefits of this, and we do that every 4 seconds across our system. And we have about a 50,000 megawatt peak, just so you can get a sense of scale. And we also plan for transmission expansion across those multiple utilities. So again, we find efficiencies in creating new transmission lines or substations or upgrades where they're needed to serve a larger group of utilities rather than just one utility. So I just briefly wanted to describe a couple of our challenges, and then we'll get into the meat of the convergence discussion here in a bit. But for those who haven't seen this is what we call a duck curve, because it looks a little bit like a duck. And it was created when California went to a 33% renewable portfolio standard. We're now at, as the Representative Chris Lee said this morning, we're at a 50% goal by 2030. But as we looked at the 33% RPS, this is back several years ago, we sort of mapped out what that might look like. As more solar went on to the system, that clearly happens during the middle of the day. And as more solar gets onto the system, what does that do to what we call our net load? And our net load is the load minus wind and solar. That helps us identify what we have to deal with in terms of dispatching flexible resources like gas plants and things like that. So this duck was created several years ago, but I wanted to just, in these arrows and bubbles that I included, talk about where we are today. And we are well ahead of our schedule in that belly of the duck. That means a low net load where we've got a lot of solar on the system. And also the neck, that we call the neck, which is our ramp in the afternoon. When the sun is going down and folks are coming home and the load picks up, we have some real challenges. So that lower dot that says lowest net load, that record was hit here last month. That's a new record to just a little over 7,000 megawatts. Think about a 50,000 megawatt peak day. We had a very low net load, way below what we thought we would see in 2020. So we're far surpassing our expectations. And then the ramp, as I said, when the sun goes down and we have energy on our system and needs on our system, we had almost a 15,000 megawatt ramp over a 3-hour period. So imagine the resources you have to call on to get there, to get up and ramp to meet that load in just a 3-hour segment. So these are challenges that we knew to expect. We're seeing them in advance of when we thought we'd see them. But it's working. We're still operating the grid. We're doing it reliably. But we see when we get to a 50% scenario, we're going to have some real challenges, and we're going to have to figure those out. Just anecdotally, we hit some records this month as well. We had our system being served by almost 50% solar at a period of time here just a couple of days ago, and the peak of 10,400 megawatts of solar on the system. So we are talking about big scale changes here in our grid. And the last slide, I just wanted to have this as a visual. This really shows you what's happening in the West, and again, I'll talk about this later, but there's a lot going on there with colors and things, but the California ISO is the yellow chunk in California, but we also instituted an energy imbalance market. It's a real-time market, so it's just an economic market in the 5-minute increments, and we offered that to other utilities around the West. And to Scott's point, that's what I do. I work with other states to understand what the value of a market like that is and what else could happen. So we have now 5 utilities participating in that market, with several more scheduled to start participating here over the next couple of years. And that's changing the dynamics of the Western energy movement, but that's just real time. There are initiatives underway in the Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico utilities that are looking to actually come together as 8 utilities and join another ISO in the eastern interconnection. So across that white line that you see, our systems are not really connected. There's a couple of DC lines that cross over, but that group is so interested in joining a market that they're looking at joining Southwest Power Pool. And another group of southwestern utilities are also looking at the potential for markets. So this is just what's happening in the West. I'll get into some details a little bit later, but it's a real interesting time. One, understanding the variable generation that's coming onto the system, and many Western states have these issues as they increase their renewable portfolio standards, and the desire for markets, wholesale markets, to sort of take advantage of that. So with that, I'll pass it on.
So my name is Martha Symko-Davies. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and hopefully a lot of you folks have been out there. I represent our latest efforts on energy systems integration. I'm the lab program manager, where I oversee the Department of Energy relationship. And as we do that, in the past, we've worked on a lot of business development and projects, et cetera, and so I feel very honored to be here and talk about this topic of convergence. It's very relevant to my role in the past as well as currently. And I might also add, I'm a material scientist. I worked on solar energy prior to my switching to energy systems integration, and I really do believe it was partly for this convergence. How do you bring these technologies together that I'll detail? How do you bring the people together and not just work on one siloed technology and getting the efficiencies up, but start to say, okay, now I have this solar panel. What are we going to do with it? How do we integrate other technologies with it? And so I think my history really reflects well on what we're talking about today. So great to be here. Let's see if I can get one more click. Oh, here we go. It's not converging for me, Scott. So as we talk about where we are today with energy systems integration, our current power system, to what it needs to look like in the future and the changes and the trends that are happening, we're really trying to incorporate high flexibility and many different advanced technologies that really represent a variety of challenges. And so if you look at the current power system where we are today, you see that we've been functioning in this kind of central controlled world, large generation, carbon intensive, highly regulated, and now as we move forward and we think about the future power system, that's really starting to look at increased variable generation, more bidirectional flow at the distribution level, increased number of smart devices, and evolving institutional support. You're seeing on the picture with the future power systems, they're still on the rooftop. We're thinking about mobility. We're talking about hydrogen at scale. We're talking many different technologies, pieces coming together from smart homes all the way to utility scale. And so when we think about smart homes, how do we take it from there to buildings, to districts, to utilities, and how do we really have optimal impact? And so as we're bringing in these new energy technologies and services, there's a host of challenges to them, and also with increasing penetration of variable renewable energy in the grid. How do we think about electrification of transportation? I heard a nice presentation from EVgo and their impacts with, as we start to bring in all these charging stations and the infrastructure and what we're doing in California, tremendous opportunities. Integrating energy storage, not just lithium-ion flow batteries, but how do we start to think about large-scale energy storage through molecular change, maybe in the form of methane? How do we think about system flexibility and really start to understand really the optimization of energy systems, not just the power system, but thermal, fuel, water? How do we understand the data? And I heard that on the prior panel, which is so relevant as we try to bring all these pieces and parts together and how they converge. So as we think about how we look at our future power system, I'm going to talk about a few examples. One is right here with Hawaiian Electric. We've been working on advanced inverters, smart inverters with solar. How do we start to leverage the work, the research we're doing to have impacts into Hawaiian Electric's vision of 100% renewable energy by 2045? And so as they come up with these new voltage schemes and understanding the smart inverters, how do you engage the community, the manufacturers, so that they're understanding the research that is ongoing? And then also, how do you leverage and make sure that the PUC is understanding what you're doing? So this convergence of the opportunity from a national lab with manufacturers, with the utility, with PUC, and as well as the Department of Energy, who also brings in their insights and guidance to the research, is very impactful. I'm going to show you one more example. We currently have been working on quite a few projects where we call them high-impact integrated projects, where they bring in these multiple technologies, solar, electric vehicle, wind, et cetera. And so we're working with Panasonic. They are located just outside the Denver International Airport. I don't know if any of you have been out there recently. Panasonic has implemented a building on a 400-acre lot, and this is owned by Full & Wider, the developer. And Panasonic has 1.5 megawatts of solar out front on the parking structure. It has 2 megawatts of storage, and they're working with the local utility and thinking about what the design of the future city would look like in this 400-acre community. And so it's a beautiful project because it's 400 acres. You don't have to redesign buildings or reconfigure. You've got this open land. And so as you design it, how do you think about going from the buildings to districts to utility? How do you think about what is the impact and role of Panasonic? What is the impact and role of the airport? What about the transportation that we have? The train runs right in front of Panasonic. What about Excel? And so as we have developed a design footprint for them in terms of energy use, we have linked the building's energy use profile to the electrical system so that things are being linked and connected. And so then now Excel can then implement through OpenDSS into their profile through Synergy, and all of a sudden you're linking all these pieces together, and we're even bringing in the transportation aspect because there'll be 700 charging stations, and where do you put it? But the really exciting part is as you design and you bring these partners together, we're looking at a different rate design for that community that will have 40 megawatts of renewable energy. And so how do you do that, and what would be the requirements that you would need to take to the PUC? So as we design this manually, we see this as the footprint for other smart cities, communities, et cetera, to utilize this energy use model and try to adopt it themselves. So not just converging with the players, the active players, the Excel, the Panasonic, the developer, Full and Wider, but starting to really merge with other smart cities and saying, hey, look at what we can do and provide. Let's not do this all over again. Here's a nice design model that you can utilize and validate it in your settings. So I'm going to stop with those two examples, but I think you're understanding the role of the Department of Energy with all these different players coming together to be successful at the end of the day.
Great example. Thanks, Martha.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Yamane, CAISO. Thank you for having me. So as Scott mentioned, in June I'm going to be 29 years working for Kauai Electric KUC. So I just thought I want to share, that path and how we transformed from when I first started at Kauai Electric and to where we are today, 2018 at KUC, and kind of share. It's kind of the view of the world from Mike Yamane, and just share how I saw things coming together and how we got to where we are today. So the first thing I want to talk about technology, and this may seem obvious to some of you, but maybe not. But when you think about the power industry, the way we're generating power today, this technology about this rotating machine spinning through a core wire is generating power. That technology has been in existence for over 100 years, and we're still generating power today. So when you think about technology, how much other industries can you think of that are using technology that was used 100 years ago? I couldn't think of anything, but yet in the power industry, significant amount of our power generation is still being used on the same technology, except for the past 5 years at KUC, where we started seeing advancement in photovoltaic, coupled with battery storage, sophisticated controls, where we were once, I say 5 years ago, maybe over 95% of this traditional technology of generating power. Today, on a clear, sunny day, a cool, sunny day, that's totally flipped, where almost 80% of our power is generated by what I'll call inverter-based power electronics. Totally flipped. It's totally changed the way we're treating this. And it was significant to me a couple years ago while we were commissioning the Tesla project, and the VP of technology from Tesla came down to Kauai. It was a courtesy visit, and just had him and another guy and me and our engineering manager, and we were just talking story in our conference room on Kauai. And his question wasn't, okay, this is our schedule, Mike, we're going to do this. It was more, Mike, what is it going to take for our project to drive your grid? And we had a really good technical discussion. We talked about the limits. We talked about what it can do, mimicking a traditional technology generation. We talked about what it can't do. A very good discussion. But at that moment, I'm thinking, wow, here's a small electric co-op in the Middle Pacific talking to a high-tech company that just, for the heck of it, launched a car in space and was successfully able to land their booster rockets. And you talk about coming together, and how before technology was pretty much, it's the standard way of generating power. Now we're having this new technology significantly impacting the power industry, which is really exciting. Along with that, so you're talking about over 100 years of the same technology. That means the way power engineers did studies, power flow, short circuit, was just passed on. This is generations of doing it the same way over and over. And at KAIC being, now over 80% of this inverter electronic-based generation, we really had to decide whether we're going to treat this technology and protect the grid from it or be innovative and enhance our grid with it. Obviously, we chose the latter, and I think that really pushed us to the next level on managing this type of technology that currently exists on our grid. So, very exciting times. It was a mindset change. It was a technology that finally caught up. Exciting for an engineer because, we're dealing with the same traditional technology for generating power, and here we are today where our mindset is different, the way we plan for it is different, and it's still more to come over here. So that's one significant impact that I noticed in my observation working at KAIC. The second is community. For those of you who don't know, KAIC is a member-owned electric co-op. What does that mean? Well, if you pay electric bill, basically you have a vote for a board of directors. And in fact, recently, this past Saturday, we just finished an election. Every year, 3 director seats are open for election. Fortunate to have 2 incumbents get reelected, but we have also a new board member. So community involvement is critical. It's the key to having this focus that drives our strategic plan. Another maybe obvious but not so obvious, when you think about our elections, that same subset of people actually vote for our local government, our mayor and our county council. So, when we have discussions with our government, and even at the state level, you think about our state legislator, our Senate president, and our House of Representatives, we represent the same people. So when we have that shared vision, our priorities might be different, but when you drill down to it and what is our common goal, it's to do what we want to do for the community of Kauai. And so even though we might have a little difference, in the end, there's a lot of give and take to come up with a successful project. And, I guess not only am I in charge of operations, I have the privilege or the duty, I guess, to be up at the state capitol. So I get to see examples of how when we have issues at the capitol for bills that are being passed that may significantly impact the co-op, to go up to our legislators and explain to them our issues, it's a lot easier to have them understand because ultimately we're representing the same people. We have a common vision, a shared vision. Recently, we're one of the only counties that implemented LED streetlights, controlled LED streetlights. And that was actually instigated by our Senator Kochi, talking to Mayor Carvalho, talking to our CEO, David Bissell, which meets with our mayor every quarterly, and just talking and having this shared vision and coming up with solutions that I think benefit. So community convergence, very critical. Those are the 2 observations I thought maybe might be obvious, but yet not so obvious when you kind of think about it. Back when the co-op started, we had a strategic plan. It was 50% renewables by 2023. At that point, we really didn't plan to be where we are today at 44% by 2018. In fact, wind was on the table, which is no longer the table anymore because of the endangered seabirds. But we just took advantage of relationships we had with developers, with landowners, with our state agencies, and we took advantage and we just started taking it step by step, project by project, and here we are today, 40% renewables. By the end of 2018, we're 50% with AES, and with, I think, continued community working together with our pump storage on the west side, we're going to need even more people working together. We got the culture aspect, the environmental, other state agencies. Everybody really has to line up for this thing to be successful. And if it happens, potentially we're looking at 70% by 2020, which is really remarkable for Kauai. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Scott.
Great, thank you. So, one of the themes that I heard in all of your remarks, about convergence was, working with different parties, obviously, at different levels. Think back, I'd be curious to know, what do you folks see as maybe the biggest barrier to convergence successfully happening? And a barrier can be anything from having a blind spot, perhaps, not having that united focus. It can be whatever comes to your mind. What do you think? What do you see as a big, significant barriers to convergence? Mike looks like he wants to try this one first.
Well, in our case, sometimes it's the priority. It's significantly different. Their vision might not be the same as our directors. Just because they're the same voters doesn't mean the people they vote for have the same focus on where they want things to go. So if those things don't come together, then it's a little harder to
So
kind of pave the
maybe
path.
competing
Yeah.
priorities or
Yeah.
not having that unification.
Yeah.
Stacey, any thoughts?
I would say in the work in the West, it's trust. And one of the things that we're trying to build is some trust in the West. California is seen as the kind of giant elephant in the West, and it has priorities and goals just like every other state. And what we're trying to do, and we've demonstrated a little bit with the energy imbalance market, is that we have the same goals, and that's to provide reliable, low-cost, and clean energy. And all states have a variety of different ways to get there. And by building trust through this small piece of the market, which is voluntary and has no exit fees and all that, it's sort of built up trust because we are actually all gaining benefits from this particular piece of the market. But it is a barrier to moving forward, and I think that's one of our challenges that we're trying to overcome, is just trusting that we are all in it for the same reason.
Great. We'll come back to that topic of trust. But Martha, what are your thoughts?
I believe sometimes it's the goals and being clear on where you're trying to head and what the roadmap is to get to those goals. And if they're not clear and you're not educating everybody about those. And so I think actually the Department of Energy is doing great with their Grid Modernization Lab Consortium, where they're really identifying pathways towards reliable resiliency, security, cost-effective, secure energy of the future. And so as they, folks like themselves can lay out those kind of pathways, and the more that people are educated about those goals, then they're successful, and that won't be a barrier.
So if you think about, we heard a lot this morning about the HCEI experience so far. And what we heard, or at least what I heard there, was the initiation of the HCEI was really to try and bring people together to have that convergence and hopefully see some agreement on a common vision and focus, and then, okay, what do we have to do about it? But what we also heard today was that, maybe in the current environment, there's been a little bit of, maybe it's become more diffuse. We no longer have that common vision, or maybe the vision is still common, the 100% renewable future. But in terms of more near-term actions and activities, there isn't really that convergence. Goals, trust, competing priorities. What would be in your experience, when you've had to grapple with those types of issues? Can you give me an example of where you or your organization have successfully been able to, move that ball forward? Stacey, you were saying something about trust. And you mentioned this maybe it's a small step forward, creating an imbalanced market.
I think it is actually going to either the state or the person directly, and understanding, sort of being empathetic to the issues that they are facing. And they might have different stressors or issues or priorities. But I think it really is, it sounds simple, but that's where we get the most done, is where we actually sit across the table and talk about the challenges and opportunities that either another utility or another state or policymaker is going through, and try to be empathetic and understand that, and try to find a solution that creates sort of a convergence of priorities. I know it sounds simplistic, but that's really where we've gotten the most done.
So, Martha, you work at the national level. You are at the convergence, I guess, I'm sorry, I'm overusing that word, I know, but from a national, working with Department of Energy, working with other labs, working with states, working with utilities and so on. Do you also have a challenge in terms of building that trust among parties, or is that more there when you begin your work?
So trust begins with showing the impact that we've had or the success that we've had. And so, for example, the work that we've done here in Hawaii and being able to show, to take that and make it nationally scalable, to move it east, that trust comes when they start to see, oh, look what they've done here in Hawaii, and oh, we should take this and try to utilize the research that's already been done. So I think showing the success and the impact builds on that trust as well.
And then here's where I thread it all together, Mike, with you. Okay, so I think KIUC being a member-owned co-op, in terms of having trust, is a little bit different lens when people look at an investor-owned utility like how Hawaiian Electric is. But nonetheless, you folks still work hard to gain the trust of your members. So when you think about the role of KIUC and partnering with folks like national labs or other mainland institutions, does that play a big factor in terms of building trust in what KIUC is trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Trust is a big thing for a co-op, and I can tell you 10 years ago, the board of directors that are here, that are elected, weren't here 10 years ago. And we have a totally different board, and that's community trust. I mean, if they don't trust you, then you get outed and a new board comes in. As simple as that. There's no fancy formula. So very, very important, and we strive to keep that trust going, even though things are relatively good at KC. We've got a lot of traction, a lot of the projects going on, try to keep costs down, try to get renewables, reliability, but that's something you really can't lose focus on, especially being a co-op.
So all of us work in this environment that has a heavy focus on technology and often some very complicated issues and complex problems, as well as complex solutions. One of the challenges I think that I've also heard is, and it does relate again back to building trust, is to be able to explain these concepts to folks who aren't always in the room with us. An example may be, Martha, you just described what sounds like a pretty amazing project in terms of that Denver International Airport project. Lots of different elements, different components, different technologies, but yet there may be certain facets of that project that to a person may say, hey, wait a minute, I thought, for example, I think you mentioned a methane storage? Is that, did I hear that correctly? Or maybe I misheard.
I think you missed.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's a different project.
Okay, that's a different project.
But we are
All right,
working on a large-scale storage with
okay,
methane,
so, but
yes.
nonetheless, getting back to my question, what do you see in this as far as the significance of being able to explain to our community, to our customers, to our elected officials, or whoever may be the stakeholders? I mean, what significance is being able to connect with their understanding? I mean, has that been a challenge to you as well?
So right now we're visually showing this Panasonic design, and so if you came into the lab, you'd say, aha, I understand. You're coming up with this energy tool. You show the economic benefits by implementing and integrating. And I think it's, at this point, it's just getting out there and educating people what, we're in a manual process. We're trying to automate it for other smart communities. And so we're trying to get our hands around what's the easiest solution to translate it. Visually, it's much easier because you can pick and place different technologies, whether it's solar or storage, but then actually coming to a city and maybe talking with yourself, there's always that challenge. But I think educating and getting that message out so that quickly, so that other people can pick up on it, and making it nationally scalable is the key.
Great. I know we're running short of time, and there's at least one question that's come in that I'll pose to the group here. But before I do that, I do want to remind the audience, please rate this session by going to the SIFT, Meeting SIFT website. So that's, I've done my duty, okay? So the themes here, connecting with potential stakeholder groups. Stacey, you mentioned empathy, trust, being able to communicate. Mike, you talked very specifically about getting to the community needs and the community desires. So is that really the secret sauce to making convergence happen? Is that as simple as that? It's more of a people thing as opposed to technology? This is a stumping question. I didn't throw this at you
I think
folks.
you need both, at least in our industry. The technology has to support the ideas and the sort of policies that people come together to create. And we've had challenging policies put in front of us, but through technology, in many cases, we've been able to solve some of these issues. We had, for example, just real quickly, this study that we did with First Solar and NREL on how solar energy can actually perform essential reliability services for the grid. Right now, we rely on conventional services for regulation up and down and spinning reserves and frequency response. And we did a study, and it was through the controls on the inverters and a sort of structured scenario of testing that we determined that solar can provide those essential reliability services. And then we need folks to understand that and find incentives, economic incentives to put that into the market. And so I think it is a combination in our industry.
Mike, you want to say something?
I don't think there's a secret sauce to solve this. I think there's a lot of things that come into play. I think it requires some kind of strategic vision, a focus on where you want to end up, and then figuring out solutions to get there, and then getting your community and your stakeholders to buy in. I think it needs all different facets of focus to get things done, and credibility.
Great. Okay, my last question. We all here are primarily involved in energy or energy technology. And comment, please, any one of you, maybe Martha, I'll throw this to you since I didn't give you a chance on that last one. Can you give some thought to how does the energy sector reach out to non-energy sectors to seek opportunities for convergence? What in your experience has been a good approach to doing that?
So I think that the successful ones are thinking outside the box and trying to utilize other technologies or pieces or parts. I mean, the Panasonic project is a beautiful example, even from the smart street lighting that they have that they might not have thought of as they're developing this community. Just all the thinking outside the box, thinking, okay, what does the customer or the client or the person living in this city really want to embrace beyond these kind of natural assets and devices and smart technologies that might exist today. So I think that people are thinking outside the box. They're leveraging, even in the, if you look at just traditional solar cells that were done with really thin film solar cells, they were roll to roll. Well, that's how we're looking at some of these new fuel cell materials. It's roll to roll. And so how do you start to leverage other things and pieces and parts? And the clever ones are moving forward and doing just that.
Great. I want to thank our panel. You folks have provided a lot of different insights, and I think, my biggest takeaway is as we all move forward down this pathway, seek the opportunities that are not in our box, build the trust, be able to take the time to really understand why are we doing all this. It may not be just because of the technology piece that's right in front of our faces. It really is, to Mike's point, connecting to community, connecting to real human users. There was one last question about what the heck was I talking about a rocket nozzle, but I'll be happy to talk to whoever that person is later on. I'm not going to waste all of your time with that. So again, thank you very much to our panel. Appreciate the conversation.